Hello, welcome to the May 17th, 2022 Club Cubase live stream. I'm going to do a quick audio test and then we will go ahead and get started. So bear with me just for a second. All right, so my name is Greg Unda. I'll be the host for the live stream today. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America as a product specialist, primarily focusing on Steinberg products. And I'll be the host, and I'm presenting from outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. So if you are watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. So as we go through the live stream, if you haven't attended one before, how it works is you can submit questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de or simply ask in the chat field. We'll try to get through all the questions chronologically as we go through the different topics. We should, when asking questions, if you could indicate which version of Cubase, whether it's LEAI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, if it's version 10, 11, 12, or if you have, if you're running on Mac or PC, that information is sometimes helpful. And when asking questions, realize my ability to answer them in real time will soon be, my ability will be obscured, but I'll try my best to catch up throughout the live stream. So if you don't see an immediate response to your question, please feel free to just, if we could try to avoid asking the same question repeatedly, that would be appreciated. And we should have all of the topics covered and discussed in today's live stream, actually indexed with timestamps, and look for that pinned to the tops of the comments field. If you want to search for previous live streams and topics that have been covered, you can go to cubaseindex.com. And as you work with that, so we want to thank Jan from Stockholm, who's compiled that website. We have two people who serve as moderators. So we want to give special thanks to Jazz Dude and to Agent K. Their moderation was greatly appreciated in the last live stream where we had bots trying to promote various nefarious sites, and I just wanted, they went above and beyond their volunteer status of making a better community. So I want to give a special thanks to them. They had to keep on their toes last live stream. So, and also if you're looking for other valuable resources that's pertinent to Steinberg community, you can check out the Cubase Nation Discord. So that's done by Jazz Dude, and we have Jazz Dude and Agent K who serve as the moderators. So special thanks to them. They're very, very busy last time. All right, so we have a question. First question from Mono Candy. How can I get a grasp of how to only record automation within the MIDI event, still using MIDI remote? I just can't seem to understand it. Is there an easy way to explain this? Okay, so when we deal with an instrument, and if we wanted to record, let's say, our virtual instrument, and we record MIDI. So if I record this little event here, and let's say I play, and I move my modulation wheel, so we can hear the modulation kind of kick in as I move the mod wheel. So now that we have recorded that information, we can see that we'll have because we're actually just recording a standard MIDI CC data, that's what MIDI can accommodate. So we can record MIDI notes, MIDI CCs, sysx, and other MIDI messages. Now, many times when we are utilizing a remote control, while it seems like we are actually utilizing MIDI for this, so we'll scroll over, I'll go to my Choice controller here. So if I have this assigned to control various parameters, so let's say if I want to open up my panel here, I could just say, let's move this particular parameter, and I want it to control, the cutoff on this particular parameter. So if we wanted to just assign, this to like a quick control, I could just say, okay, I wanted my cutoff to be assigned. So just click right here, So now we've assigned cutoff to quick control 1. So if I wanted to, at this point, have this controller just do a quick control. So I'll just assign this to focus quick controls. All right, I'll just assign this to quick control 2, very quick. All right, so let's say I come here and I have my quick control. So as we want to record that information with the quick control, we're not actually, while it's MIDI information that's recording, that's controlling the unit, it's actually MIDI information that's controlling the plugin. And this MIDI information will now be recorded as automation, but not within the actual event. So as I come over here, I'll just move my quick control. So as we play. So that's not actually MIDI data that is being recorded. It's being controlled by MIDI data, and the MIDI data is controlling the automation. But what's actually being recorded is the automation. And that's why we see some of the messages will show up within the MIDI part, and then we have other messages that are for virtual instruments, the plugins. And as we have the plugin parameters, those aren't actual MIDI messages, but those are being triggered, remote controlled by a MIDI message and recorded as automation on the plugin. So that's why like many automation won't show up. Now, if all of these parameters in your instrument will respond to MIDI CC as soon as you transmit it, then you don't need to assign through the MIDI remote tab. So the MIDI remote tab is, for automating and doing automation of different plugin parameters. All right. So I'm going to break out my chat here so I could see it a little easier. Bear with me just for a second. Okay, so we have a question from Captenergy Music. So with the arrival of Cubase 12, are we still able to use any previous Cubase version from the license? So with Cubase 12, that actual license is only going to be used for Cubase 12. And if you are updating and have projects in previous versions of Cubase, like Cubase 11, 10.5, 10, those are still being able to run off of the USB-E licenser. So we didn't take away the license from your USB-E licenser, and the USB-E licenser will only go backwards. But from version 12, if you bought version 12 right now, you would not have a Cubase 11 license. And why they do that is for compatibility. And if you're buying Cubase for the first time, you probably don't have Cubase 11 or Cubase 10 projects to worry about previous versions compatibility. But Cubase 12 can still open up projects back to Cubase SX, or basically Cubase 1 within this current generation that we're on, from 1 to version 12. All right. So we see Sable Winters on the live stream. Great to see you, Sable. All right, so we have a question. How do I toggle between multi-plugins in the same track so that I can, when I activate one, the others deactivate? So there really isn't a particular function for that. But one thing you might be able to do is to utilize something like if you wanted to use the mix console snapshots. So let's say I have a particular, I wanted to compare plugins here. Let's say on this drum loop. So let's say we have this going on, and let's go to our inserts. And let's say I wanted to add an insert, and I wanted to put a weird delay on. So now when you play it back, and I'll make it a little faster. All right, and so what I could do now is literally just kind of take a snapshot. So we see this little camera icon. If you don't see this in the mix console, just click right here. We can take a snapshot. And let's say if I wanted to compare that with other plugins, so let's put a flanger on. When in doubt, always put a flanger. All right, so let's say now I play this back. Okay, so what I could do now is we could choose to take another snapshot. So we have two different snapshots. And we could label these snapshots as whatever we want. And we could come right over here. We'll say, okay, let's go to our mix console snapshot recall settings. So here we could choose to say, I only want to deal with inserts. All right. And let's say only on the selected channel. So let's say as we're playing, I wanted to go to a different snapshot with the previous plugin. I could just click here. That snapshot will be recalled. And now, so we go from the delay and we can recall the second snapshot. So that would be a way if you wanted to compare different plugins. What a lot of people also do is just simply come right over here and duplicate the track. So if you just right click, you could duplicate the track. And then as and you could have different EQ plugins on each of these and just simply solo between those two different tracks. That's another way of doing it. So let me know if that works. All right, so we see Greg, please, how to use a drum map. No drum kit is out of place. So if you wanted to, make a drum map, so let's say if I come here and let me just add a new instrument. Let's do like a Groove Agent SE. All right, so let's just do brand new scoring percussion. So let's say if we just want it to come here. Okay, so if I don't have, if you're doing it inside, so if we're doing it inside a Groove Agent, we could have Groove Agent automatically create the drum map. But if you're not using Groove Agent, what you could do is just kind of come over here and let's say we will, if we needed to create a drum map, is we could come right over here and let's just choose to come to our, so let's make it into a MIDI drum editor. And now you could just kind of type the names in here and you could create kind of your own drum map directly from there. But also if you wanted to go to the drum map setup, we could come, so it's good to just come over, we'll select just the event, we'll go to the drum map setup and you could just click on drum map setup from right here. And this way you could actually just kind of double click. And if you wanted to just start with a brand new drum map, so we say new map, and then you could just come right over here and type in names. And I think that if you even kind of just click to the side here, you could, as you hit the different MIDI notes, that you could just simply label them accordingly as you hit. So you could just come right there and have the drum map. So let me know if that makes sense and kind of answers your question. Okay. All right, so we have Rick France checking in from Oregon. All right, and we have Mr. Michael Finlayson from Charleston, South Carolina. We'll give special props to Michael Finlayson. When I was young and in college, he let me stay at his house so I could go to the AES show in New York City where I saw Cubase for the first time. So if you like live streams, I really owe my career and a lot to Michael Finlayson, so we'll give special props to Michael. Glad to see you. We'll get to your question towards the end. All right. So we have a question. My version of Cubase 12 stopped working after 2 months, claiming that I had no license. No reply from tech support. Anyone else having this issue? It worked until I installed on my laptop. So check to see if you have it on multiple computers. Let us know if you if you have it installed and you could have it Cubase 12 activated on up to 3 different computers. And if you activate it on another computer, it may deactivate it. So if you go to the Steinberg Activation Manager, which is installed with Cubase 12, it's a little utility. You could choose to activate and deactivate and check to see what your activation status is there. And because if you put it on multiple computers, you might have to deactivate one of the computers. All right, so we have Benny checking in from Sweden. We have Robbie Bowling from Dallas. Brian Sawyer from Beulahville, North Carolina. Okay, so we see Brian just mentioning, he says, from his question, he says, you're right, recording was at 48K, Cubase was set to 44K, changed the grid, and grids lined up, so it's good. It's nice when it's an easy solution like that. Okay, so we just see a question, kindly give a full tutorial on drum mapping, and it's from Lagos, Nigeria. So I think we may have just kind of covered that a bit, but if you go to a particular drum map here, you'll see in any of the MIDI tracks or instrument tracks where you'll see no drum map. And then here you could just go to drum map setup, and then you'll see under functions that you could just do kind of new. And at this point you could just kind of create drum maps that could be automatically used here. So you could double click to type in the name of the sound that you want, what you want the snap to be. You have in notes and out notes, MIDI channels. If you want it to be on multiple ports where you say, okay, I want this going out of this instrument, my kick going out of another instrument, my hi-hat out of a different. You could have different note head shapes tying into the notation. And if you're doing kind of polyphonic drum notation, you could set up your different voice schemes right there. And then you could just simply save the drum map. Now, if we have a drum map, drum sounds are loaded into Groove Agent, one of the great things with this is this level of integration where we could just say create drum map from instrument. And now when we double click on the part, this will automatically have all of our different sounds that will be named directly from the particular drum map right there. All right, so we have Jan from Stockholm on the live stream. So we see, Greg, what is the minimum space on disk C for Cubase to work well? So I think the program itself is, under a gigabyte. So it might be like 700 or 800 megabytes for the actual program. Now, when you get into content, you could have the content on your C drive or on any drive. So if you wanted to have all of the content, then it's going to be about 30 gigabytes. But if you have like an external drive or a secondary drive for audio or samples, then you could have all the content on another drive. But if you just needed to run a program without content and drum samples and stuff like that, you could, I believe, do it under, it's like 700 or 800 megabytes. So, all right. So we have Mark Larcher checking in from France. Thanks for joining us. We have Soren from Sweden. All right. We have Nick checking in from Essex in the UK. All right. We see Kerwin Young on the live stream. I think I missed him earlier. See See Benny saying he's currently saving to get an AXR4, so that's great. All right, so you see Michael Pierce from London says, hope you're safe. I've been using Cubase so much that when I watch one of Greg's YouTube videos, I was convinced that numeric pad 0 was stopped. It really isn't. So yeah, for YouTube, you need the space bar, but you could also hit K and that will stop. Little YouTube wisdom there for you. All right, so we have a question from Dallas LaRue. I can't find in the preferences the disable or hide commands. I'm trying to make a macro to disable and hide a track with one key command. Okay, so let's say if I wanted to disable and hide the track, what you could do is let's come over here. Let's create a macro. So we're gonna, and a macro is just a series of keyboard shortcuts. So we will come over here. So let's say I want to do new macro. We'll call it hide and disable. Okay, so let's go to, I think it's under, let's look under visibility. Okay, so we look under channel and track visibility. So we'll say, so hide selected channels and tracks. So we'll add that. And then I think it's going to be disable. I think this is under macros, so let me just get past that. So I think it might be under audio. Disable, enable track. Let's add that command. All right, so I'm going to do it for, so we have hide and disable. So I'm going to take this track here. I'll just call it hide me so we know it's which one is being hidden. And let's go to our macro. So we'll choose hide and disable. And now those two, when we look at it, we had the visibility agent, and then we could just have it disabled right there. So try just that. So again, under key commands, you'll see under audio is the disable, enable track, and then we could go to channel and track visibility to hide the selected channel. So give that a try, Dallas. Let me know if it works out for you. Okay, so we see question. I have a bundle of waves I would like to install, and I would like to install them by category, EQs with EQs, compressors with compressors, etc. So I haven't used Waves plugins in a long time. I think I'm waiting like 20 plus years for my new authorization code from them. Gave up. But let's come over to our plugin manager. So, you know, what you could do is when you go to your VST Plugin Manager, Here you could just choose to sort by category or sort by vendor. So you could do this by VST effects, and at that point, if you choose sort by category as it's installed, you should see your Waves plugins under EQs, in compressors under compressors, etc. And that category information is provided by the manufacturer. So you could just set that up, and again, to access that, just go to your VST Plugin Manager, and now you could choose to sort by category or sort by vendor. And if it's still not to your liking, you could click on the plus sign and create a brand new like plugin collection so that you could organize your plugins exactly how you want it to be. All right. So we see Graham Witcher from Royal Bhutan Wasset. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we see a question, Greg, please, I'm using Addictive Drums 2. Can I replace my drum tracks in my project with Groove Agent sounds, which I really like? Certainly. So really all you have to do is, if you have like a drum pattern here, so let me just pop over, let's say if we have MIDI notes, you may have to, let's say we grab a pattern here. Okay, so let's say this is your Addictive Drums. And let's say this is your Groove Agent. Just copy the MIDI parts over. Now, once you're in the particular, drum editor, you may have to change like output notes here to, the O note to change sounds, but you could just drag over the MIDI data, and, most of the times like kicks and snares should line up for the most part, but you may have to tweak a couple of notes. And you could just do that by adjusting this. This is the input note, and the O note is the output note that it's being mapped to. So you should be able to switch pretty easily. Lots of people have. All right, so we see that we have Tim Weinheimer from Mission Viejo. Thanks for joining us. All right, my chat field just jumped, so. All right, we have Uno Memento from Finland. So just see, Greg, please, where can I see you play bass? So I don't think there's many videos of me playing. You might be able to, I played in a group that was called Mojo. You might be able to find something on YouTube. But I think, since COVID, we kind of went on hiatus. So, but you might be able to find something. But check out, you can listen to the Hot Mess, HOTTMESS, and you can check out some of the stuff I played with on there. Okay, so we just see, Greg, the new mouse over control doesn't seem to work on any third-party plugins, just Cubase VST. Do you know if they're working on fixing this? An easy fix would be to add mouse scroll control. So really all that and if you're not familiar with this, in the particular function is, that is just mouse scroll control. So if we wanted to assign this, I assume it's being done from like a MIDI remote. So let's say if I just double click on this and I wanted to assign mouse pointer, we'll call it AI knob. So we'll say that we want to do value of the mouse pointer. I'm going to apply the mapping. So, really all that particular function is doing, anything that I hover over will automatically be controlled from the MIDI from the remote control right here. So, but let's see, I don't have many third-party plugins on my system, but if I wanted to come over here, I may have, let's see if I may have an instrument. So I'll just try this. So I don't want to lock that. But as I just come here, this is responding to the mouse scroll wheel as I work with it. So, so it's really, that's all it is doing mouse scroll wheel. So it's no problem to just kind of come over here. And if it's not working with the third-party plugin, that could be that the third-party plugin doesn't actually utilize the scroll wheel. All right, so we see a question. What is the Cubase safety mode and when should it be used? So sometimes Cubase will allow you to start without preferences. Like, if there is and often what happens is maybe a plugin crashes Cubase and then the safety mode kind of will kick in. So sometimes what would happen is a plugin would get installed and a plugin would crash, and then every time you tried to load Cubase, that plugin would prevent Cubase from opening because it would scan the plugins, and then at that point it would be like, I can't get into Cubase because this plugin crashed and the plugin is preventing me from getting into Cubase. So that's why you could start in safe mode, which will allow you to bypass preferences that perhaps, and that's another thing that could get corrupted from different options and operations in the program and the operating system, or plugin. So if you double click and immediately on a Windows platform, hold down Alt Control Shift or Command Option Shift on the Mac platform and just hold those buttons down, you'll be prompted if you want to enter in a safe mode so that you could delete preferences or delete preferences and choose not to load third-party plugins. So usually if your Cubase is having a hard time starting or something is just acting really weird, that's when I would do the safety mode. And that would often kind of resolve the issue. All right, so we see, I feel like sometimes even when I turn off a plugin, removing the plugin entirely will change the sound, even if that plugin was off before I removed it. So I haven't come across that, and I think if you probably, I know that sometimes there could be, we'll call it like an audio placebo effect. But sometimes, if you actually did a recording and, analyzed the sounds, and Wavelab has some really good utilities for this where you could take two different audio files and compare them and generate a delta file. And then you could see if there's differences, but I don't think that there would be any change in the sound. So, but if anyone else has run into that, please feel free to kind of. All right. So we see, I think it's Juha from Finland. Thanks for joining us. All right. We have Samson Strike. He's in Austria, I believe. He has nice sun with clouds and 25 degrees Celsius. All right. So he's looking for ice cream from Michael Teams. All right, so we see, hello, do you know when Cubase will make it possible to use Learn CC on Arranger events? So you could do it now. So like if we wanted to just assign, so it's not, I think you could use a MIDI CC for it, but let's say if I just wanted to take a particular MIDI message, let's say I just have some knobs here that I wanted to control. So when I double click, you could go over here to key commands to arranger, and then you could just toggle 20 different arranger events right here through MIDI messages. So if I had an arranger track, we could assign these to different MIDI controls. So at that point you could, and that could be a MIDI CC, or, you know, ideally it'd probably be something like a button to be more accurate, but you can remote control the different arranger events directly here from the MIDI remote or from the generic remote editor. So it's not on the actual arranger track area, but you could do it through the new MIDI remote or generic remote. So you just go to key commands and look under arranger, and then you could, for live performance, a lot of people use this just to, and you could go to, you know, go to next chain step, previous chain step, stuff like that. So you could assign those directly from MIDI messages. All right. So you see, hi Greg, how's it going? I just wanted to know why there's a large gray box around all the plugins. This happens with the stock and third-party plugins as well. So I think what some people I've read online, and I think that the developers are getting it figured out, but if you go to a particular plugin, what sometimes people will do is just click on the QC area, and then when you go to the quick control, so it doesn't do it with all plugins, but it seems like a lot of maybe VST2 plugins are kind of causing that, so they're trying to figure out, you know, what is causing it. But try just sit there and click on the QC in the plugin for the quick controls, and that seems to kind of alleviate the issue for a lot of people. But I know the developers think they have it figured out, and sometimes when different companies don't follow exactly plugin specifications, we run into little anomalies like that, and sorry that it happened to you. Okay, so we just see question. Some tracks, MIDI and audio in a project I created in Cubase 5 are locked. Can't unlock in Cubase 11. Looks like inspectors grayed out. How can I unlock or at least rescue the other tracks to a new project? So one of the things that it could be, if it looks like it's grayed out, check to see if it is, maybe it's a disabled track or it's a frozen track. So when you come here, if it kind of looks like this, you know, it could be that the actual track itself is disabled. So we'll try right clicking, and at that point we can just choose to enable the track. Now if the track is frozen, so let's say if I come here and we choose to freeze the particular track, so we'll come here. It may also, when importing from previous versions, like if you can't unfreeze the file. So check those two things. So right clicking to disable or enable the selected tracks, and see if it's also frozen as well. Now elements could also be locked. I'm kind of leaning towards the disable track if it's grayed, but you could also like lock tracks to particular, like I could only lock this to the position, but I can move it up. You know, I could just come over here. So you could lock different attributes of the files from the info line as well. So look there to see if any of the parameters are locked. All right, so we have a question. When I remove some part of a drum track that I pulled in from Groove Agent 5, the drums continue to play. What am I doing wrong? After all, it should be quiet. All right, so let's say if I'll just jump this over. So let me just revert this back quickly. Okay, so let's say I have all right, so let's say we have this. Now let's say we have Groove Agent. So if it's still playing, so sometimes what happens is you may have Groove Agent set to follow transport. The drums continue to play. So let's say if this is set to follow on transport, so let's say I erase this event. You know, we could have the event that's triggering notes, but we could also have where Groove Agent will play kind of by itself. So make sure that it's not running kind of from its internal sequencer as you're doing that. So it's something a lot of people may have kind of going on at the same time, where it's, you know, they copy the event is triggering sounds as well as the sounds are being triggered from the internal, internal sequencer, because this is in play mode or follow transport is enabled. So check that. Michael's just thanking me for glad your visit worked out so well. So it did. Thank you. Always indebted to you, Michael. All right. All right, so I just see, Greg, can you clarify the global and local? How do I use it? So if you could, and this is from Ari, so if you could let me know what aspect of the program, I mean, there's kind of local control for MIDI, but maybe if you could clarify which aspect of the program global and local is, and I'd be happy to kind of figure it out, and just nothing's kind of popping in my head. But let me, if you could specify a little more, that'd be great. All right, so we see question. I updated my UR816 drivers this Monday, and now whenever I switch applications, I have no sound even after closing Cubase. I've enabled the driver release and the sample rate. Any idea? So what it could be, I ran into this with my AXR4 with the update as well. So let's say if I come here, so as you're playing, check out, and it's going to be probably a little different than this interface, but you'll see like the outputs. So as you play back audio from the web, if you kind of scroll on the output stage, you may see like the meters going, and you may just have to raise the volume in the little software mixer. So probably once you do that, then you'll be able to hear like your web pages and system audio going through it. So go to, let's see if I could even open up the DSP mix for AXR, if it'll open up without one connected. Bear with me just for a second. Yeah, it's not going to show anything useful. So if you kind of scroll to the outputs and make sure, you'll probably see one of the volume faders down, and at that point you could just raise up the fader in the little DSP Mix FX software in the outputs. Okay, so you see about the activation not working on the laptop. Question says, thanks, Greg, but I can't deactivate C12 and the other machines as I have only use 2 seats. Sam is claiming that I've used 3. I guess I'll just have to wait for support to reply. So, I mean, you could activate it and deactivate it multiple times. So it's not like once it's done on there, it's permanent. So you could just simply deactivate it. And so that way, if you need to have 3 machines at home, you could deactivate one, go to someone's house and activate your license there, and then deactivate it and then activate it at home. So it's a dynamic thing. It's not like kind of fixed. All right, so we have, is it Danger Smith checking in from London? Thanks for joining us. We see some discussion about the Zoom meetup. So the Zoom meetup, we usually do, for those who aren't familiar, we'll usually do kind of a the last live stream of the month. We'll have like the last 2 hours, or it usually ends up being 3, is kind of a Zoom social where everyone could talk and meet. But one of the things this time, I think the last meeting maybe like when I'm traveling for the NAMM show, so it might be the Friday before the last meeting in May. So it would probably be I think 27th or 28th, the Friday before Memorial Day in the US. So just a heads up with that. All right, so we have Peter checking in from Montreal. Thanks for joining us. So I just see a question. I would like to buy UR816C. Do you know timeline for delivery? So currently, the interface was discontinued because of parts shortages. So, it's a wonderful interface and it's still going to be supported for a long time. So there may not be a lot of new manufacturing just because key components, it was almost 2 years ago, maybe 19 months ago, there was a fire at the AKM factory, which makes the converters for a number of different audio interfaces. And they haven't been able to rebuild. So that's why you see a lot of audio interfaces kind of, shortage of supply. So, and some of the components haven't been able to be replaced on the UR816. So if you see one, get one. I don't have one. I wish I got one. So. All right, so we just see, is there an intern GPU setting section in Cubase Artist 11? So if you're, there's a CPU meter, or like an audio performance meter is probably a more accurate term, that you could see kind of the VST performance. So we see our audio performance meter, and this looks slightly different in version 11. In version 12, they kind of differentiate between the real time and kind of the ASIO guard, where it's kind of doing, tracks that are playing back and are not record enabled. So this is kind of what you could see the audio performance on your system. But if it's looking specifically for like the graphics processor unit, the GPU, there isn't like a GPU meter. There are starting to be some audio interfaces or some audio plugins and technologies that are starting to use GPU, but it's not so widely used now. So, all right, so we see Dallas Aru that the macro worked. So thanks for letting us know. And we see from Oi Diwali, and I know you had some questions about selecting stuff, so I don't know if I don't remember getting a video, so if you got a chance to create a video, that would be helpful as well from the last live stream. I just see also my video has yet to be sent, so yeah. All right. So we see a question. Is there a way to copy and paste or parts in frozen tracks in Cubase? I'm working on a CPU intensive project, so I have more than half of my tracks frozen. So currently not, but if you are running into a lot of CPU resources, with instruments, one of the things that might be perhaps more flexible is, let's say, if, even if we have just something here, is maybe using the render in place functionality. So let's say instead of, all right, so let's say there's my 21st century composition. But if I was like short on CPU, I would probably have more flexibility with render in place. So let's say if I just wanted to take, a particular event here, that we could, just do a quick render in place on that. So, and then if you wanted to, one of the functions you could actually do in render in place is to have it automatically disable the track, so it's not taking any CPU cycles. And even though it's disabled, let's see if I could still copy it I could copy that data to other tracks. So if you wanted, freezing is a little more restrictive in that you can't move the events after because they are frozen. But if you disable, if you render in place, and then you could, again, select the particular event here, go to render in place, go to the render settings. If you select the track, at this point, let me just, that you could choose to disable the source tracks. So I could render that, we could disable, and you could even choose to remove source tracks. So that may be something to consider, is just to render in place, because then you could copy the data freely to other tracks if you needed it. All right, so we have Stefan checking in from Sweden. So we see a question, is Nano Control 2 supported natively? So yeah, if you have it, as long as the drivers are working, but if Cubase detects the Nano Control, it will automatically be configured directly into the new MIDI remote tab. So let's say if we wanted to we'll jump home. So if you wanted to see what Nano Control would look like, you could just come right over here and think. And then at that point, you could just have the Nano Control here. So I'll just set it to, and then you can see what kind of the Nano Control does. So you can see that this will be quick controls, faders, transport, etc. So. All right, so we see, when can we get a gain plugin from Steinberg? So, most of the time people just end up using, if you are wanting this, is every channel itself has a pre-gain of 48 dB of gain or cut directly in the pre section, and you could access that directly in the channel strip or the EQ. So you could just come right here. So let me know if you need a particular plugin, but you have kind of this function here that will give you, that can boost or cut gain by 48 dB. So, and you can see it in the pre section of the mix console. So let's say if we go to our pre, you could see our gain here with the phase, or if you're in the channel settings, you could just adjust the pre-gain right there. So let me know if you need a particular plugin for a reason, but you should be able to access your gain there. So we see, hi Greg, do you know if Steinberg Yamaha are working on any multi-fader controller? 16 channel would be great. So, there's still lots of people are using like the Yamaha consoles for that, but I haven't heard of any particular plans for like immediately for coming out with a particular control surface. There's obviously lots of people wanting it though, so. All right. All right, you see Samson Strike just saying Nuendo is a dream. So all right, so we're just seeing from Got Your just saying when you use the mouse scroll wheel from the mouse on the third party it works, but not from assigned MIDI remote controller. All right, so I'll try it again here real quick. So let me just jump back to my choice os. All right, and let me just. It seems like mine it's working on some things, but let me just. Like as I come over here, now let me just check the one other setting here. See if I do it in lock state. So there we could lock it to a particular parameter. But if I try it from just my CC121, it's kind of working. So it seems like I'll pass that along. So it seems a little inconsistent as I utilize it here. All right, so you say question, is there a way to quickly randomize all the parameters of a plugin / effect? I know that some plugins will have that as a particular feature, but I don't think that there's a way in Cubase to take every plugin or effect and randomize the particular parameters that I know of. But I know sometimes, certain plugins will allow you to do that. All right, so we see Mark Rabin is shopping in Montana while watching grocery shopping in Montana while watching the live stream. So that's dedication. And I think Michael Pierce wants some ingredients for his soup. So if you could pick that up for him, Mark, that would be great. All right, so we have a question. Is it possible to create a macro or project logical editor to do the sequence of actions? 1, create an empty instrument track. 2, add VST instrument, a particular VST instrument, and open the instrument editor. Thank you. So I don't think that there's a way to open a particular instrument using a logical editor, but what you might be able to do, so I know you could add the track and you could open up the instrument, but I don't think that you could specify which particular instrument is added in a macro or logical editor command. But let me just see if You know, if you're using, like, one of the things that you know, if you're kind of not in, you know, it could be that there are some utilities, I know, like visually disabled or blind people will have different controllers that can spit out characters. But I don't think there's a way of doing it in Cubase, and maybe if someone else knows, they could pass it along. But it might be possible where you could do a search, you know, where you could just say, okay, add instrument track, and then search, and then, but, you know, like I could say, I want this to be retro, you know. So as I'm looking for like particular instrument tracks or looking for tracks that you could search, but there's not a part of the logical editor or macro. I'll just try project logical editor again, just see if there's any way of doing it. So, but I don't think that there's a way to choose to open a particular, like we could select by particular names. You could choose to, you know, disable instruments by particular name, but I don't think that we could choose to define which instrument. Not that I know of, but I'll pass it along as a feature request. All right, so we have Oxy Vandenberg checking in from Holland. Thanks for joining us. All right, we see Daniel checking in from Germany, and he says, don't forget to like, so push the thumb up button. So that's how we can continue to do these live streams with people watching and giving likes. All right, so we see Samson Strike is doing stress testing. He's recording 6 hours in Windows and plugins and surfing internets in the same system to collect drops and clicks. Incredibly stable until now, so that's good. I remember having to do that at Mark Knopfler's studio when we kind of fixed his live recording rig and had to record 3 hours of 1K test tones across 48 tracks. So whenever I hear a 1K test tone, I think of London. So. All right, so Samson Strike just says, since I found Club Cubase, so much new input reminds me of SAE 1988 Munich, sucking it in like a sponge. So. All right, so we see what would happen if I change the sample rate from 44.1 to 48 and bit rate from 16 to 24 bit in an already open project. Would it mess up the audio? So you would have to, you know, your audio, the sample rate of the audio would have it play out of time and out of pitch. You would have no problem recording whatever multiple bit depths within the same project. So if you're going to do that, you would have to, if you wanted your existing files, your existing audio at 44.1 to play back properly at 48K, you would have to do a sample rate conversion. And you could do that either like we showed last time, but you could also just go to the pool menu and you could take all the audio files. And at that point, you could select them all and right click and choose to convert files, and you could choose to convert the sample rate. So, but the sample, it would need to be one common sample rate. So if you wanted the previous files to play back together, you could record 44.1, switch to 48K if you don't want the two files to play back simultaneously. If they're not contingent upon that, then it wouldn't be a problem. But and you could record at whatever bit depth you want without any consequences and switch that. See, Michael Pierce is going to miss his Zoom on the 27th. I think that's when it's that Friday. So he's going to see a musical. So and bringing the Ukrainian musicians, that sounds like a good thing to do, Michael. So. Okay, so we see just a comment, question. The only thing I miss from Ableton is ability to instant quantize entire audio files, warp markers to grid. So let's say if we're here, you know, like, and let's say we have kind of our hit points. So we'll just double click here. Okay, so, and at this point, if we wanted to quantize, let me just, I'll just come right over here. So let's say, okay, I want to quantize this to eighth notes. Just enable audio warp here. And then you should be able to kind of quantize the entire audio files, warp markers to the grid. So it's just like normal quantizing. So let me know if that works for you, Dunstan. All right, so we see a question. I bought Yamaha MG10X UF with Cubase for free. Is this the same software, sir? So we're using kind of a more advanced version of the software. So you get Cubase AI with your Yamaha MG10X UF interface. So that's kind of a subset of features, but many of the, you know, so there may be some features we'll show that's not in that version, but it is an incredibly capable version of what you have. Okay, so we see comment just fixed a frozen audio track, MIDI track still locked, no option to enable, only to disable. Grade lock is the one to the left of the lanes button, can't delete, mute, or disable locked tracks. So yeah, so I mean, if you want to share a project, I'd be happy to kind of take a look at it, but you know, maybe it was rendered, but, you know, and sometimes what happens is it might be rendered from an external instrument. And if that's not, you know, you could see if maybe it's lost its connection with the instrument it was assigned to. But if you wanted to share a project, you could send me a link at clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, so we see just the clarifications as the reason for a gain plugin is to have it between inserts, keep gain staging in check. So, you know, if you wanted to come here, you could have plugins that will add gain without doing anything. So, you know, if we come to a dynamic, so let's say if we don't put any compression on, you could add more gain. So let's see if we just come. So you can add 24 dB again just by having a compressor on without anything turned on. So you could, you know, have gain in different plugins there as well. So if you needed to do gain staging, you could just do that and not engage processing on different dynamics or EQ plugins. All right, so we see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas. He's going to start dispensing virtual ice cream. All right, so we see, is there a way to zoom vertically with the mouse in the arranger? So yeah, this is kind of an odd thing where we could, with the control or command key, we could zoom horizontally here, but we can't, I don't know a way to do it vertically, but we could, if you just hold down like Shift plus H and Shift plus G, you could do that. Or if you wanted to do it, you know, directly with, so this is just G and H and Shift G and H, you could also just come here and use the zoom tool, say, okay, I want to see that, and then double click, and you could just go back directly to where your zoom value was if you wanted to. So, and then if you wanted to, just with the zoom tool, double click, keep double clicking, you could go right back to where your previous zoom state was. So, but there isn't like I'll try to clarify it. I'm going to be getting together with some of my German colleagues during the upcoming NAMM show in a couple weeks. So I'll make sure to bring that to their attention again, see if there's any reason why. All right, so we see Sable has received 1 gallon of sweet peaches and cream ice cream from Michael Teams. All right, so we have Rahim checking in, so you don't have to worry about being late. All right, we have Madge Deepers checking in from the UK. Thanks for joining us again today. Okay, so I just see, hi Greg, I tried to create a sequence of commands to colorize several tracks in only one project, something like 30 specific tracks, but it didn't work. Okay, so if you wanted to, let's come here, I'll just make this little. So let's say if I wanted to take all these tracks and make them the same color, I could select them. Let's go to the color tool here. And I could just say I want them all to be like a particular color. So just make sure there's no events selected. So we could just colorize multiple tracks just like that. So let me know if it's just if you wanted to colorize multiple selected tracks like that. All right. All right, so let me just move on. All right. All right, so we see a question from Madge Deepers. I'm using a PreSonus Studio 24C as an audio interface, but I can only get Cubase 12 to use its driver if I go into safe mode when I open it. I then select Studio 24C driver. Can this be fixed? So Madge, let me know if you're running on Mac or PC, but you should be able you know, like you should be able to obviously just, you know, have that work, you know, so it should be, you know, maybe, you know, when something like that could happen is maybe the audio interface is crashing on the way out. But let me know if you're on Mac or PC, and make sure that you're using the ASIO driver on Windows or the core audio driver on Mac. That would be helpful. All right, so we see Jazz Dude's doing some nice moderation for us. Sorry you had to take the extra effort. All right, so we have Gerald Ely checking in from Martinez, California. Thanks for joining us. All right. Okay, so we have a question. My speakers are connected to the computer with SPDIF cable, meaning that the volume can't be controlled from the computer. So when the mixer is on 0 dB in Cubase, the volume is destructive. So I turn the main mix down, but when exporting audio, it's obviously way too quiet. What's the best way, Cubase, to set Cubase up so volume is decent out of the computer, but the main out can stay at 0? So what I would do, this is like a perfect use case of the control room. So when you go to the audio connections, like let's say if we're doing the stereo out, have the stereo out in the outputs defined but not connected. If you're in the control room area, what you could do is add a monitor. So I have like my Yamaha HS7s, and I have these connected so that when I play back my project, so let's say if we come here, so let's say I select this and we play it, and we look at the mix console here. I could set the mix console. All right. So we could have our fader here in the mix console. I could adjust the monitoring volume in the control room without affecting the gain stage in the mixer. So this way you could just have your control room volume set up as the monitoring volume that doesn't affect the gain structure of the mix. So that kind of decouples it as just your monitoring volume in the control room. So that's a kind of a perfect use case for the control room. Okay. Excuse me. Michael Team says whack the like button and you get a free Neve console. So that's good. We'll see if Spunky has one for sale. All right. So we have Leonis D. Genius. Am delighted to be part of this amazing lesson. So thank you for the kind words. Hope it's helpful. All right, so we see from Madge that she's on Windows. So make sure that you are running the actual ASIO driver for the PreSonus Studio 24C. I mean, it should automatically be routed to that. It could be, you know, if you have like your system sounds going through that, try having the system sounds go through something else, maybe some other program is kind of taking over the audio interface. So check to see if you disable like system sounds going through it. Imagine if that changes the behavior. Okay, my chat field just jumped on me. Let me just find my... Okay, so back to roughly where I was. All right, Uno Momento is passing on a pint for people's to match up ice cream and soup sharing. It's very generous of you. All right, so we see from Diego, suggestion, it would be great to be able to see the chord track while editing a vocal or instrument in Very Audio, something like the global tracks in the MIDI editor, but on the Very Audio window. So yeah, I'll pass that along. So, you know, there's some adjustments made to have the scale assistant, but it's, you can't see it, but you could have the chord track kind of seen, you know, at the same time, you know, in the project window if you do it like that. But I understand the desire for that, and I'll pass it on. Just sending a message. Someone is calling me repeatedly. Bear with me just for a moment. Okay, so it says, and this may have been with our coloring question, it says, I forgot to mention, I tried to create commands with Logical Editor to colorize several tracks. I think missing something in the Logical Editor. So if we wanted to come here, let's say I wanted to colorize tracks like that have the word audio in them using the project Logical Editor. And so all we would have to do is let's go to our project, to the project Logical Editor. Let's get to setup. So I will start from kind of a blank state. So we want to say, I want to transform, we'll say media type is equal, or we can say container type is equal to a track, and name contains, let's say, audio. So I have all these audio 01 through 08. And so we're going to take any track named audio, and what do we want to do to tracks name audio? We want to set the color to a fixed value. So I will just come here. We'll make it just kind of that color. So now I'll just click, and we could transform just like that. So we could also say, you know, tracks that are selected that have this. So kind of any criteria for name. I want to take muted tracks, you know, tracks that are muted and turn it this color. Tracks that are soloed and turn it this color. So you could, so that's how you get set it up. So you set the process here to transform, what conditions that you want, and how you want to be colorized. So let me know if that helps. Okay, so we see question, are there any advantages to using VariAudio over Melodyne editor with ARA? So obviously, I think having, VariAudio directly within the particular sample editor makes a lot more sense. So it's obviously way more convenient than having to load like an extension into the system. I think that I'm not a big Melodyne user. Since VariAudio came out, I haven't used it really. But I think like really the significant difference is that, Melodyne can work with polyphonic audio. Some people have had good luck with it. Some people haven't. But if we wanted to just, kind of come directly over here, this is all directly integrated. So we can see kind of the colors based on chord tracks. We have the scale assistant directly here. So, I think there's a lot of advantages to using VariAudio unless you need to break up chords in an audio file. So. All right, so we have Mike Rivera checking in from San Antonio, Texas. See Michael Teams is indicating that Spunky, who's kind of a famous pro audio dealer in Dallas from Audio Dog, he's moving to Sedona in Arizona, and he's going to be closing up his shop. So yeah, we'll all miss Spunky, one of the treasures of our industry. Okay, so we see a question. I'm in South Africa. How do I become a Cubase beta tester and one of their go-to guys for new equipment, marketing, or roadshow displays in different shops that sell Steinberg gear? So how I got started is I actually just wrote the distributor a letter. So I think in South Africa there is a kind of a third-party distributor that does it. So I would reach out to the South African Steinberg distributor and see if they have any opportunities available for you. So, when I got started, it was a little over 30 years ago that I just wrote a letter and kind of made up my own job. And I've been lucky to still do it 30 years later. So good luck with that. Okay, so I just see from J Visuals, would there be any reason why exporting Sphere stereo audio tracks exports the stems in 2 channels? So maybe I'm not sure if the Sphere stereo audio tracks, if that's an instrument, but it could be, when you're exporting, one thing to check out is when you do your export audio mix down, it should be independent if it's a plugin. But when you say export as, make sure that it's not set to split channels or left-right channels, but set to interleaved, and see if that makes a difference. And let me know, Sphere, if you get a chance, if that's a particular plugin or if it's like spherical, like immersive audio. All right, so we have a question. It says, one more time, please. How do I quantize my every new track to the one I set at the beginning? So quantize one and then the rest follows it as I keep creating new ones for different instruments. Okay, so let me see if we... So I'm not sure if you want to do like kind of like a change one and the others are changed with it, but let me just. Okay, so let's say if I want to quantize this to 30-second triplets. Or make it. Okay, I'm going to undo that. See if I can get my modifier key right. All right, so let's say I've copied this part here. All right, and now I'm going to quantize this one to quarter note triplets. We can see that what I did is I held down Alt or Option plus Shift and copied that particular event. So now anytime that I make an edit in the first event here, this will automatically apply and the other tracks will get updated. So let me know if it's, so if that's the one that you said at the beginning, so quantize one and the rest follows. So, but if you wanted to, if they weren't shared, so let's say if I come here and I just copied this particular event. So if it's just like for the quantize, I could just select both events here and say I want these to be half note quantize, and both will be quantized to half notes. So let me know if that is helpful, John. Okay. See, Neil Conway has joined us. Mike Chatfield just jumped. All right, so we see question, is there any way to stream Cubase through Discord with sound, or being able to talk with others through Discord while using Cubase? I'm on Windows, by the way, so it could really depend on your audio interface. With the Steinberg interfaces, you have a loop back function, and you could connect a microphone to the input and be able to kind of stream the output of the audio interface to, like, a Zoom or through OBS. But if so check to see if you have an audio interface. A lot of people on Windows will also use Voicemeeter. That could be a little complex for some people to get set up for different scenarios. What I do for my streams personally is I take my output of my Cubase audio interface into a mixer where my microphone is connected, and that mixer has a USB output, and that's what I use for streaming as opposed to doing it internally. That way I could switch sample rates, and I don't always have to have a microphone connected, and I could be a little more flexible. All right, so we see Jarlath Quinn on. Thanks for joining. Good to see you again. All right, so we have a question from Madge. Is there a way of using color gradients on events, etc., or are the event colors limited to what's in a color pop-up? So if you wanted more colors, all you have to do is go to the project colors setup. And then if you come over to presets, like here we could see, okay, we're going to have 8 basic colors with 2 tints, but we could say I want 32 basic colors with 4 tints. So now if I hit apply and I go to colorize tracks, we could have a lot more options directly there. So, and then you could save that as your default color preset if you wanted to. So once again, project to project color setup to presets, add more basic colors and number of color tints. All right, we see Mark Rabin is eating and watching the live stream, so that's great. Thanks for joining. Glad you got your shopping done. All right, so Michael Pierce's soup is French veggie potage, saute leek, onion, garlic, add potatoes, carrots, celery, stock, and whole thyme and parsley. Simmer, remove herbs, puree soup, season, and swirl through pesto. These always sound good. Thanks for sharing your soups. All right, we got David M. checking in from Liverpool. Great to see you on the live stream. All right, so we have a question from Benny. Is there any setting that I can set that every time I open a project, the tracks always turn guitar blue, bass red, drums blue, etc.? Hope you understand what I mean. Thanks. So, you could always have your different tracks as a template. So if you wanted to do that. So, but you could also, so let's say I'll just go to a particular project here. And let's say as we're listening to this, I want it to have, activate it. So, at this point, we could say, anything, and we could set up just a project logical editor preset. So let's come over here. So if you wanted to just start off with your template, you could have your template set up like this, where your drums and bass, guitars, and that's how a lot of people will work. But if you're kind of working kind of more dynamically, we could say, when we go to your project logical editor setup, we could say, okay, we want to transform. Okay, so any track, container type is equal to track, name contains bass, and we'll set our color to red. And we could save that as a preset. So at that point we could, just simply, so we'll just come here. And at this point we could say, tracks with, like in this case, I wanted to, so I wanted to track name contains kick, and then I could just come over here. So let's say name contains kick, and then we could say or. So we can say kick or, cat K, kick. And then we could just kind of do all your different name variations. So we say snare. And we'll say or. Let's say SNR or hat, hi-hat, high dash hat. So you could set up all these different conditions, and then you could actually just have it as a macro. So every time kick is this, every time snare is this, drums are that, guitars are this. And then you could save those as different presets if you wanted to, or just kind of start off with a template. All right, so we have a question. Is there recommended hardware? I know there are a few that could control Cubase to have faster control and operation. So, with the new MIDI remote, you could basically kind of use anything that transmits MIDI messages. Something that is always helpful is to have something that has, buttons and knobs and faders and sliders. It gives you a little more flexibility, but probably if you learn keyboard shortcuts, that could save you just a tremendous amount of time. The greatest control surface that you can have is knowing your keyboard shortcuts for getting faster. And so, try to teach yourself a new keyboard shortcut every day. Teach yourself 2 or 3 new keyboard shortcuts and integrate those in with your workflow, and you'll be super fast. One of the fastest people I've ever seen on Cubase is Stevie Wonder. Just because he knows his keyboard shortcuts very well. So, all right, Michael Teams wants people to hit the like button. Okay, so we just see a question from Evans. How can I use DR660 as a module output for my different sound? And I connect it as via MIDI. So, as soon as all you'd have to do is create a MIDI track. So we can add a MIDI track, and, if it has a USB interface, you could send, the MIDI information out to the interface that's connected to the DR660. I don't know if it's like a drum machine or something like that. So you could send MIDI out to any destination. Now, many times people want to then take the MIDI that's being generated outside of Cubase and have it go back into Cubase. And to do that, we would need to connect it to like an audio interface input. And we could come over here and then define that as an external instrument. So if you have like an O1W or your DR660, we can tell it's connected into these inputs. And then when we go to add an instrument track, at this point, we would just select, when we go to add an instrument track, I'll do it correctly this time, you'll see external plugins, and then you could just choose directly from there. But realize that, once the sound is being generated outside of Cubase, you have to incorporate it via a mixer or connect it as an external device directly into Cubase if you wanted to run it through plugins and have it incorporated within your like stereo audio export. All right, so we see Vince Music says, congratulations for his beautiful work you guys do on YouTube for Cubase users. It'd be great if many developers did the same. Keep it up. So it's been interesting. I've seen some other companies try to do it, and they kind of seem to abandon it quickly. But I think it's a wonderful community, and I look forward to doing these every Tuesday and Friday. I may not look forward to doing all the indexes afterwards, but it's a really important part of the process. So, but usually on Tuesdays and Fridays, I'm working till like 10:30, just getting the indexes done. But I think it's a great resource, and the effort is worth it for the benefit of the community. So, but it's a wonderful community, and that's what makes it so engaging for other people. So. All right, so just see, when I use Very Audio, sometimes my S's sound like Z's, like a buzz saw. So the one thing that you could check out to do is sometimes as you're doing some of the Very Audio, one of the things that you could do is play around with the formants. So you may have to be in the switch all smart controls on, and try here just to adjust if you go to the lower left hand corner, try adjusting the formant a bit and see if that makes a difference. All right, so we see Sable Winters are going to take a little break and join us. Probably has to work or something. All right, so we see from John, just says follow up. I meant record one instrument, quantize in one track, and then create a track with another instrument. I need to make it timed as the first one, and so on and so forth for the rest. Okay, so if you want to do that, John, sorry for misunderstanding. Let's see if I still maybe have. This project. All right, so let's say if, so I'm going to open up the quantize panel. So we'll just come right over here. So let's say quantize panel. Okay, so I'm going to just take, let me just activate this project here. All right, so as soon as I actually, I'm going to take, let's say I love the feel of this part here. So what I want to do is to drag it into my quantize panel. This then saves it as a preset. So then when I go to apply the preset to other tracks, and I could select the other event and then hit Q, and that would quantize it based on the timing of this particular event. So let me know if that helps. So just drag the event into the quantize panel. That will save it as a preset that could be applied to other audio or other MIDI tracks. All right, my chat field just jumped on me. Let me find where I was. All right, so we have a question. If I have a folder with tracks, can I send the folder to a bus, or I have to open it and send the tracks to the bus? In other words, can I send a folder's tracks to multiple buses? So yeah, so let's take a quick look. All right, and I'll start revert this one here. All right, so let's say I have all these tracks. I want to add it to a folder, and I want to send it to a bus simultaneously. So there's a macro to do this. So let's say we go to macros, and I think it's selected tracks to new folder and add group channel. So we'll give it a name. I'll call it drums. And then we could just have it in the folder and the drums bus directly within that folder. So, because so some people want this to automatically be routed to a group, but, the folder track can contain video, can contain audio, like elements that don't generate audio, other track types, tempo tracks, stuff like that. So that's why they're kind of decoupled, because the folder is more for organization and is not limited to audio. But if you just, again, come up to your macros, and this is one of the built-in macros, and yours will probably be less than mine, but you'll see selected tracks to new folder and add group channel. And then you could do it in one motion. All right, so we have Tiago checking in from Brazil. Thank you for joining. Great to see you. All right, so we see, how do I color a number of tracks within a folder? All right, so if we have the folder open, I could come here, select the tracks, and then we could change them all. If I have all of them selected here, so if I include the folder itself, I could come make them all green simultaneously. If the folder is the only one open, I think that we could come over here. Let's get to the project logical editor. We may be able to colorize within the folder track and tracks within. So let's come over here to the project logical editor. So we want to take media type is equal to or we'll say our container type is equal to folder track, and we'll choose or media, or container type is equal to track. And we'll say property is set to parent object is selected. So let's see if this works, and we'll set color. So we could, so it didn't change the folder, but it changed the folder track here, plus all of the events to the same color. Let me see if I change this to or. Yeah, so if we come here, we could just say container type is equal to folder track. And let me just make sure that this is closed. So I will come here. And let's also add just a property is set to event is selected. So let's see if we do this. And I want it to be all bluish. So yeah, you can kind of play around with it like that if you wanted to. So give that, you could do some different things in the project logical editor for that. All right, we see from Gerald Ely, just says, thank you, Greg, for the indexing. I love to go back over these to see if I missed anything. So. All right, we see Michael Pierce just says, Club Cubase is a huge selling point for Cubase. I mentioned to users of other software and they're bowled over by it. Thank you as always, Greg. So you're welcome, and just glad that I could help people kind of be creative. All right, so we see, okay, Greg, is it possible that we have these sessions, like 1 hour of it, just you illustrate, for example, Cubase shortcuts or whatever subject everyone wants? So yeah, I'm up for doing that. So maybe we could add like a hour. And we talked about it last year, and I never got around to it, just busy doing this and many other things. But, you know, maybe we could do like an hour on Groove Agent, an hour on this, and it's more kind of a featured walkthrough. So if people are interested in that, I may be doing some on Nuendo coming up, just talking to some of the guys in Steinberg about that very topic. So that'd be something. But just let me know like what topics you'd like to see, like a specific, like deep dive, like hour walkthrough on. See, Mark Rabin's just saying the quantized hint is gold, so it's good. Just see a comment from Madge says she's a Studio One user. They do a similar thing as part of their Sphere subscription, but you have to pay for though. I'm loving Cubase, but feel like I'm being unfaithful. Just got to go with your true love. That's all. So I have many friends that work there. So, but I think a bunch of them just got fired from being sales people. Now with the Fender acquisition, so things may be changing. Hope them all the best. Okay, so we see Gerald Ely just saying, okay, that quantized trick is new to me, so that's good. And as Michael Pierce mentions, you could also do quantized presets from loops as well. So audio MIDI, just kind of drag them over. See, Michael Pierce had revelation today. Had no idea that the add folder and group, macro existed. So yeah, that's why we do these live streams, so show you all the great stuff you already have. All right, so we see a question from Element. Thanks for joining us. Hello, Greg. Is it possible to migrate from one Cubase to another with custom plugins, collections list? So generally, most of the things will be carried over. If you go to the Edit menu and go to a Profile Manager, and this will carry over like, your plugin collection, your presets, your track presets, your macros, your key commands, different like global workspaces. All those things can be carried over directly in the Profile Manager, so you could export it from one version of Cubase and import it into another Cubase on a different system, and then you could restart with the profile and everything will kind of work as expected for you. So all right, so we have Sesame Inc., SESME Inc., joining us from Central Florida. Thanks for joining. Okay. So we see Mark Raven is going to go to the mountains and make some music in Montana. It sounds pretty delightful. All right. All right. So we see a question. Is there a way to pitch bend WAV files apart from Vari audio? So yeah, you could come right over here, and let's say if we go into, let's say, our sample editor, just jump right over here. So let's say if I just wanted to take just a section, so let's listen to just a little section of this. So let's say right on that, I want to do like a. So what I could do is I'm just going to select. So let's say I just want to take just this one. So if you go to process, and then you could just simply come right over here and go to pitch shift. You could also hit like F7. So I could say, okay, let's just come right over here, and now we listen to it. So let's say if I want to take like this whole thing, we could choose to transpose, or just kind of do an envelope. So we could set kind of the range of semitones here and just kind of draw up. So let's say now. So let's say I want this to pitch shift up. So let's come over here. And again, I could just kind of select the region. Let's go to pitch shift. So, and that will automatically apply to it. So. Or if I wanted to take just a section of the audio and pitch shift it, again, I could just kind of come right here. So you could do it kind of globally or just draw in kind of pitch envelopes, and you could have time correction on or off. So if you want to change the pitch, like let's say I'll just take kind of this file, and let me just do a quick, and I'll turn the time correction off. So let me just. So you could do all sorts of different kind of pitch shifting in there. You could also run it through, if you want to do like different drops, like a plugin. You look under other, and there's one called Loop Mash FX. Do chops. Scratches, stuff like that. So there's a couple of different ways of being able to do that. And then if you wanted to just come over here, you could just delete all of the processing on that, even after saving the project. All right, so we see a feature request for project versioning, allow Cubase to save different edits, automation tracks in one project, taking notes to each project. Very handy to have multiple sub projects into one. So yeah, it gets to be, tricky in how far it goes. Like you know, but you know, I've been in discussions of that and what levels to implement it, and do you want automation for this, and how does that coalesce if there's different tracks or different edits. So, but many people, like for different types of projects, may use track versions, but it may not do exactly the level that you want it to. You're also seeing just throw your audio into a sampler track, and then you can just use pitch bend. So that's true. All right, so Mark Rabin is up for deep focus, like a deep dive, and Groove Agent 5 would be high on his list. Okay. All right, so we have Filter Freak from South UK. Could you show us how to use the Atmos components in Cubase? All right. All right, so let me come over here, and I may place back at the wrong sample rate. But let's see. We'll try maybe. See if we get like a classical thing going on here. All right. I'll just convert. So we need to, first I'll be at 48K sample rate, and we need to have it set up so that I'll switch the sample rate on this project so that your buffer size is at 512. Okay, so we're going to come right over here, set our buffer to 512 samples. Okay, where it's at. Okay, so let's say we're listening to a project here. And what we want to do now is go to your project menu, and this is in 12.01. We choose ADM authoring for Dolby Atmos. At this point, we could go click on the setup assistant. So say we want our main mix configuration to be 714. And we could just come over here and have our bed configuration to 712. And then we're going to choose our down mix to binaural so that we could actually kind of mix directly with our headphones. And then if we wanted to, we could just be able to select our different tracks here. So let's say I wanted to take these tracks. And if you have headphones on, we could now come back, and I'm going to make objects. So you have beds or kind of things that are constant. And then we could also just take our tracks and add objects. So now if we wanted to just take our particular tracks here. All right, so now when I go to the panner, we could double click, and we could now just come over here. Let's just take these two. So I could move this, let's say, more behind us to the left, behind us to the right, and we could adjust the height. So let's say I want this more to the left. And this one I want more to the right. So this way you could pan your different elements here, and as we kind of just pan a particular, and then we could kind of listen to it on headphones using the binaural mix. And then once you're all done, if you wanted to, you would export something called an ADM mix, an ADM file, and at that point, that's what would scale it across to different platforms. So when you go to the ADM authoring, you can now just come over here and export it as our ADM file. And that's what, if you have stereo speakers, it gets down mixed to, or if you have 64 speakers, it gets spread out across. So that's how you get started with some Dolby Atmos. All right, so we see question. So I know there's a command to randomize pitch velocities. Is there a macro to randomize the note lengths? Okay, so let me come over here and switch modes. I do a new, see if we saw that one project open. All right, so let's activate this project. Okay, so let's see, we have different note lengths. So let's see if we could do it in a logical editor. I'm not sure, but we'll take a look. So let's say we want to transform, type is equal to note, and we're going to say length, set to random values. So there we could just change we could randomize the length of notes just right there. So and let's say between 300 and 500. I think that might be ticks as we do that. So you can kind of set ranges for the length of notes as well. So give that a try, Best Green Jesus. Let us know if that works for you. See, SESME Inc. has always been impressed by Cubase since Greg was a traveling teacher. No other company thought about their users that much. Says a lot, doesn't it? So try to help people out. Okay, so Mark Raven just says to me, thank you from us all. You're awesome for doing this and consistently, and the crew here is way the best. So I think it's a wonderful community. So thanks for the kind words. All right, we see Madge Deepers. Just gonna have to log off real quick. So we'll see you next time. So we see Yaren just saying, I don't have that many macros, so I make up many macros on the fly here during live streams. So I know some people, I told them I would send some of the logical editor presets. I'll go through my emails so I can get those sent over as well. All right, so we're seeing more people wanting kind of a deep dive into Groove Agent. So I'll see if I get that prepared. All right. All right, so I have a question. I think this is a basic question. How do I control the amount of backups when I'm working? Like, there are a ton of them, and I usually don't even use, as I'm afraid what I'm going to overwrite. So I think it's might be a preference. So let's check the preferences here. And it might be under general. So you could choose the backup interval, and you could choose the number of backups. So if you didn't want to have a bunch of backups, you could just choose to limit that number, so that it's on autosave when it's doing the backup files, that it will just only keep, one version behind or two versions behind. So you could set that up once again into preferences. And under general, then you'll see when autosave is turned on, you could just turn on the maximum backup files, and you could adjust it right there. See, Samson Strike is still doing his recording, so he's only seeing the noise floor from the TC Liquid 56. All right. All right. So I just see, maybe it's just a comment that's directed to Jazz Dude. Says, yeah, I understand something. Is there that's not jiving with me? If I audio warp things, then I do very audio to correct pitch, it seems to undo the warping. So I haven't run into that, but we'll go test it just to make sure. All right, so let's do like a really obvious warp here. So let's just take that little section. Okay, so we'll just take those two bars and let's go ahead and warp them. All right, so I'm going to do some warps. So, and then we'll do very audio after. Okay, so let's do some quick free warps here. I'll just kind of. All right, so now we'll listen to it and. All right, and we'll just make this into different rhythmic figure. Okay, so as we listen to just that little phrase, and let's see if I could just kind of repeat the rhythmic value of that just to make it more obvious. Okay, and now I will do very audio editing on it. So it seems like the Very Audio and the warping were still there. So we changed the rhythmic figure to kind of like a dotted 8th, 16th. And as we did that, it just everything was right where it was with the warping and the Very Audio. So let me know if I did it differently than you. All right, so we see, anyone know when Groove Agent kits go on sale? Gas for that cinematic scoring pack. Yeah, so the new scoring percussion library was just released today, so that's a great one. So it may not go on sale on initial release, but there's always different content sales going on as well. And there's currently a for people cross-grading from other programs into Cubase. We've had so many people doing that, so we're make it a little easier for people who don't want to be on subscription services only. So we see question, any tips for sharing sessions between Cubase 11 Pro and Pro Tools via AAF? Currently events clip are coming a bit mangled, so if you're going between them, so what a lot of people end up doing, I find that the AAF has worked pretty reliably and has been pretty stable for getting stuff, but figure out if it's like, I think that like basic fade ins and fade outs are carried over. I don't get too many AAFs from Pro Tools. But if you could let us know how they're mangled, but make sure, one, that's going to be like consistent sample rate, that you have like some of the basics are there. But if you have any particular AAF files that you're having problems with, if you want to share them to me, you can share them to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Right. Okay, so we see from Sable Winters, says, question, Greg, added new generic remote, piano MIDI. Please explain fader assignments for controller and VST mixer channels usage. Piano has no faders. Project has tracks. All right, so, if you have, a fader of some type, let's say if your piano, so if it doesn't have faders, you could assign the keys to actually do particular functions if you wanted to. A lot of times your piano may have like a pitch bend or a modulation wheel. So, maybe if you go to, so let's say if you're in the generic remote, let me just reread it to make sure that's, okay, so let's say we added generic remote. Okay, so I'm just going to come here and learn. I'm going to set my inputs, let's say for my panorama, to be in and out here. So I have a modulation wheel. So as soon as I come over here, let's say and it's going to capture what MIDI message it is when I click on learn and move. My modulation, let's just see. All right, let me just check my MIDI monitor. Okay, so we have control 1. All right, so let's go back to our generic remote. And let's say I want this to right, so let me see if I can. Okay, so now I have the right MIDI ports. So if you have, like let's say I wanted this to control control room volume, just my modulation wheel, I could just come here and have that. But if you wanted to have like particular MIDI keys that do different functions, so it may not do, like let's say you may not play the highest octave. So if I come here, I click on learn, and I say, okay, I just want this particular key to do something. So I'm just going to click here, and we can see that once we have MIDI learn enabled, I could come here and I can say, I want this to, like here I have it opening up the control room, but let's say now when I hit this particular MIDI note, I want to open the mixer. So at this point, we'll say, let's go to command and we'll go to devices, and let's open our mixer. So now I hit apply. So every time I hit that key, it's going to open up my mixer. So you could have it do stuff like that. But if you have anything that's kind of transmits, instead of a note on, note off message that can transmit like a modulation wheel that can transmit values from 0 to 127, then you could actually say, I want my modulation wheel to control like the volume on selected channels, stuff like that. So I could say, okay, let's move my mod wheel, and we'll say, I think we can come here. Let's see if it's gonna act up on me or not. So let's say VST mixer, selected, volume. So I could hit apply here, and now anytime that I have a track selected and I have my modulation wheel turned on, so I select this channel, my mod wheel is going to control the volume on that particular track. So if you have, but if you wanted to like turn stuff on and off, that's really good. If you wanted to control panning or the track, if you have something that's spitting out like a MIDI CC, like a mod wheel, that can make a big difference there as well. All right, so all right, let me just find my okay, so we just see from Michael Pierce, quick question. When should you keep the sample position versus not when doing things like sample rate conversion? I've never quite understood that. I'm a fool. So no, it's not foolish. It's just, so if you're dealing with your project timeline in samples, that way, the audio will maintain its actual sample position. It probably should default to, no instead of yes when we do like a sample rate conversion, like we did earlier with the classical piece. So, I don't know of a time when, it's more kind of an academic, like, would you be able to keep it at the same exact sample position? So many times you wouldn't want to, because, you'd want it to play back together, at the correct time for the sample rate. So don't feel like you're missing out on anything, Michael. Just reading through comments. Thanks for all the great questions. All right, we see Gareth on the live stream, so glad you can make it today. So question, Greg, is there anything you can't do in Cubase? Violently impressed with your knowledge of this program. So I learn something new all the time in Cubase, and it's, you know, I'm sure that there's people on the live stream who know much more about Cubase than I do. But I remember once I was working with Hans Zimmer, and he's just like, and we spent a couple hours going over things, and he just looked at me. He's like, "You're the only one that runs Cubase, not for yourself." Whereas everyone's kind of figuring out their workflow in Cubase, I have to try to figure out everyone else's workflow. So I guess I have that as an advantage from my perspective. But I still want to learn new things, and even when I have an hour or two free, I'll try to teach myself something new. It is an incredibly deep program. So it's been job security for a while for me, for 30 years. And Gareth comments just with the keep events at sample rate. So yes, as events going out of sync, no, we'll keep in sync. So that's a good way to think of it. Gareth is saying phase is the yin yang of mixing. So yeah, my friend David Kahn, he's always like hyper aware of phase issues. So I think he's a fan of the Supervision plugin, where you see phase in multiple ways. All right, so we have Mitch Michelle checking in from Michigan. Thanks for joining us. Glad you could be on the live stream today. All right, so we see from Mitch, how can I do a real-time render in Wavelab like Cubase has real-time export? So I'm just trying to remember if there's a way. I think if you have an external processor, that would always do it. Let's see if there's a way to put it in. Okay, so let me just, oops. All right, so let's see if we can. All right, so we go here. So it might not have a render in real time unless it's actually utilizing external processors. But maybe if you could let me know why you need to render in real time. Most people don't like that, but I think it would have to be employing like external processors for that to work in real time. But maybe Mitch, if you could let me know why you want it to work in real time. All right, so we just see, it's just a question. First of all, when I export audio files, the CPU capacity increases by 100%. Even though my CPU is a Core i9 in previous versions, this did not happen to me. So some things that may cause it. So see what happens if you go to your audio interface and raise the buffer higher. See if that makes a difference. Let us also know if you change like under the audio system, like the volume automation precision, that may make a difference as well as a difference. But I haven't run into any, I have an i9 PC and an i9 here on my MacBook Pro. So my PC's for my personal studio, and I haven't run into that. But also see if it might be determined to, it might be caused by one particular plugin. So if you try with all built-in plugins and see if that makes a difference, or, take out different tracks and see if that makes a difference. If you could let me know, that'd be helpful. We appreciate Jazz Dude and Agent K for their vigilant moderation. So just see on a warping, and this is our question with the warping in Vari Audio. It says I start like you did with free warp and then used Vari Audio algorithm and it moves it all. So it might be that you have to, because Vari Audio will switch it to a particular algorithm for its processing and detection. So it could be that maybe if you start with the one particular with the one particular algorithm and stay with that one, like the real-time algorithm, that would make a difference for you. Okay, so we see a question, is there a way to monitor CPU and memory usage? So you can kind of see it in, there's different CPU monitors at the operating system level, but often when you're doing that, that may not make much sense for, like you may see, like as we look in the audio performance meter, this may show different things because it could be that, one track, if you have 14 plugins on and 100 tracks with no plugins on it, that one track is kind of utilizing, one CPU core, and that could be like slowing down your whole system. So, check out your audio performance here and, you try to enable, disable different tracks, but realize that sometimes some instruments, if you load up multiple sounds within an instrument, that's only utilizing one CPU core, and that can make your whole computer, while running Cubase, come to a crawl. But you look at your CPU meter in the operating system and it doesn't look like, Cubase is not using all the cores. It's just how plugins work. They could only be utilizing kind of one core at a time often. So that could be kind of the issue if you're seeing a disparity. All right. So we see further question. It says in the second point is that when I zoom in on a project page, the image vibrates a lot, which is very annoying. So I would check if you're on PC with an i9. You know, I don't have that, but check. I mean, that sounds like it could be display driver related, and that could be the problem for your CPU, like for your CPU jumping up. But check, first of all, you know, if you go to your preferences, if you're on Windows, and go to General and try to turn off high DPI and see if that makes a difference. And then there's different scaling resolutions, but it sounds like that could be a display driver issue, and that could be causing kind of both issues you describe. All right, so we have a question for Greg. Is there a way to have stereo flipped in the down mix presets in Control Room? I don't know of a way to flip it. Let me just... Yeah, but the one thing that I've seen some people do if they need to flip like the stereo out is they will just come here to the audio connections, and let's say they go to their control room and they will set up like the same outputs but just in reverse. And you may have to, so you could say one. So let's say that this will be. So, and then you could switch from like stereo monitors to stereo monitors flip just by switching between two different monitors. So that's one way that I've seen some people do it. All right, so just see asking if I'm breathing freely or can I hear a hold of breath. Nice voice overall, so I'm not really doing it. I'm just breathing kind of normally. You may hear, for some reason, my Mac's fan is on today, so you may hear that in the background. All right, so we see how to map Tascam DM3200 table with Cubase 12. So if you have any, you know, if they transmit MIDI controllers and you have your MIDI remote, all you have to do here is, you know, we will just add a new MIDI remote here, and you could just start off. Okay, I am using. You know, we will add a vendor. So let's say we're going to add a Tascam. tell it, you know, your DM3200. I think these had some limited remote control capabilities, like the faders would transmit MIDI. Define the MIDI in and out ports. And then all you'd have to do is you say, okay, I want faders. And then just move each of the faders, and that should automatically populate all of the sliders. And then you could use the mapping assistant to automatically assign those to functions inside of Cubase. But as long as it transmits MIDI in and out, you shouldn't have any problems. See, Sable Winters is going to do some practice utilizing generic remote. All right, so we see best way to correct an audio dropout. So probably the best way to do it is to actually come over here. And as we, the first thing to do is we can think of like increasing the buffer size. So when we go to your audio interface and come over here and try increasing your buffer size. And we can think about this as, as it's doing processing, think of this as like a huge conveyor belt that you have to kind of pack all the bits of audio, and you want to put it into, if you have like 128, 128 widgets that you have to put into a box versus 32. So if you had to put 32 into a box, you have less kind of headroom to deal with than if you had 128. So you could fall behind, catch up a little bit. So the first thing you would do is, to have your computer work easier is just to raise the buffer size. And that's kind of like the first thing to do. So I would try that. All right, so just seeing, all right, we see Randy Lee from Texas. All right, so we see Mitch is just saying that he wants to render in real time because certain Acoustica plugins do not work otherwise, like Celestial. So I'll do some research on it. If you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, I could see if there's a way to do it. So I just see a question. Hi, Greg. What's your signal flow right now? Not the sideways. So I'm just going into a Shure MV7, going XLR out into a Yamaha MW12CX mixer. So that's what my voice is going through. And my audio from the computer is going out of a UR24C into the same Yamaha mixer. All right. All right, just reading through comments. All right, so we have a question from anyone. What is a lane used for? So often a lane is going to be used for when you have multiple audio recordings on the same track. So, so say if you are comping vocals, Sable, I could have multiple files all recorded onto the same track, like you're doing multiple vocal takes. And then each of the takes can be stacked so that we could just listen to the individual takes here. So I can say, okay, I want to listen to this versus a particular, let me just check my control room volume again. So if I wanted to just switch between different takes. So these are all coming on the same track, but each of these different performances are captured in a lane. So if I come here. So that's what lanes are used for. And you'll notice that you'll have an indication of lanes when you look at an event, whether it's audio or MIDI, and it's kind of has these diagonal lines in it, and it's indicating that there's multiple events underneath which are available in the same track. Just want to check something real quick as potential inserts. Just seeing if Mix Convert had a preset for flipping stereo. Doesn't look like it does. All right. All right. Okay, so we have just a question. Cubase, hello, Greg. I have an issue with Cubase 10 Pro, which does not recognize my M Audio Fast Track 8R on Windows 10. Windows recognizes it, but not Cubase. Thank you. So make sure that, you know, because the Windows audio drivers are different than what the drivers that generally Cubase uses. So you want to make sure that you have the ASIO driver installed for that, as opposed to just like the regular Windows driver. So make sure that you have the actual ASIO driver for that installed. And if that's still working on Windows 10, then it should be fine. I think if memory serves, that might be kind of an older interface, and you know, so maybe the ASIO driver is what you would need to install as opposed to the Windows sound driver. Okay, we have, it says just from Camille. Hello, I have a question. How to make a piano roll melody from a sample in Cubase without attaching any keyboard instrument and know how to tune the sample? All right, so let's say, let me just find a sample here real quick. Just a new project. All right, so let's say I have this little piano part. All right, so let's take a look at that. And let's say at this point, I want to go to, I will select that event. Let's go to our project menu and go to our chord track, and we'll create chord events. And we can see that it's going to tell us what the chords are here. So we're going to start off with probably an E minor chord, going to D flat major. So to D flat, to F sharp, B minor. All right, so we can now have those particular chords. So if we wanted to add an instrument track, okay, so at this point we could say, okay, we have our chord track. And now as we would start to enter in, we could go to the scale assistant in the MIDI editor. And then we could say we want to use the chord track. And once we're in the editor here, we could also just say, okay, I want to show pitches from the scale assistant only. And now as we would draw notes in, we could just have these notes automatically follow based on we could just do our snap pitch editing. So as we draw notes in, we could just have those automatically conform to the actual notes that were derived from the audio sample scale without needing a keyboard, or if you don't have keyboard skills. All right, so we have a question. Is it possible to configure Cubase so that on a track where there is no audio, there is no processing of a plugin? So you could do that in preferences, and this works with VST3 plugins. So when you go to VST, all you have to do is set, there's going to be, I think it's under, that was here. Let me see if it got moved. Oh, it's right here. Suspend VST plugin processing when no audio signals are present. So just check that. So go preferences to VST to plugins and check suspend VST plugin processing when no audio signals are received. And Jazz Dude had a great suggestion for the flipping the stereo. So if you wanted to do that, is just to, within the stereo panner, within the master panner, I'll just revert this so it's not in Atmos for this. So let's say, just come here and let's put this into your stereo combined panner. And when you move it to orange, then it will be backwards. So you could just move that straight up. So thanks for mentioning that, Jazz Dude. Okay, reading through comments. Okay, so we just see from flip side. So are you saying that if using multi-instrument tracks like Contact, the rank will only use one core for the entire 16 instruments? So I think Contact, I know Hallian has something similar, and there's probably something in Contact. I'm not a Contact expert, but let's say if I go to Hallian Sonic SE here and we go to options, that we can just come over here. So you probably have to enable it. So, and then like in Hallian Sonic and Hallian, you can see that you could utilize more CPU cores here on a particular instrument. So check to see if Contact has something similar. But a lot of instruments surprisingly do not have that. So you could kill one CPU and bring your Cubase system to a crawl, even though it's not showing all the CPUs are being utilized in another CPU meter. Okay, so we see from Hamed, just says he turned off high DPI and zoom would be okay. Thanks a lot. So, yeah. So you just see, hi, I'm new to DAW. Would you be kind to educate about Cubase's 3.4 smartphone version in coming days? So I could do it. I don't know how to, I might be able to, I have kind of this system set up to broadcast from my laptop, and I'm not sure if there's an equivalent on, there's probably an equivalent on iOS. So I could see if we could do maybe a live stream on Cubasis one time. But I don't have it set up, and it may take a little time to get it researched and solid to do kind of live stream presentations for it. Okay, so you see, all right, from Michael Finlayson, watched a lot of these. First one live, most impressive. Greg is able to keep his head together with all the random stuff flying at him and give a reasonable response to each question. Kudos. So it's because I went to James Madison University like you did, Michael. All right. All right, so we see question, is there a way to set the cursor to stop at the end of the project? So I think you could set up a play to next marker kind of function towards the end. So let's come over here. You could also, so there's a play until next marker function that you could do within the transport directly there. So okay, so I just see from Camille's, we don't understand each other. I mean, how to make a piano melody from a given sample from any loop. So, generally, maybe if you could ask your question in a different way. So, if you have a loop, you don't necessarily, have the ability to, extract MIDI information from the loop for a melody. So let me know if you have a loop and you want it to, in turn, turn around and make a melody based around that would fit around the harmonic content of that loop. Okay, so I know we had a lot of questions that were mailed in. Let's get to those before we run out of time. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. Okay, let's go to some of the questions. Let me switch over. And if you've learned something new, make sure you hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed, make sure you do that as well. All right, so just a question sent in by Michael Finlayson. I know he had some follow-up points that he had messaged to me as well. But we'll show kind of the first thing first is how to take a tempo detected audio file and set the tempo to 50% of the values. All right, so I think the scenario was he wanted to do like a halftime feel for MIDI drums on a recorded audio file. So let me just revert this. So let's say we'll do this as one of my, and if we turn on our, so if we have a varying tempo here, let's say what we want to do is to have our tempos be kind of almost divided by half, so that MIDI will follow that. So to do that, first off, we want to come over to our Project Logical editor. And let me just say we're going to take we want to transform, and then we will choose media type is equal to tempo. And what we want to do is to now trim, and we'll say divide by 2. All right, and what's going to happen now is we'll see that our tempo, like when we start, is 180 beats a minute. So when we do this, I'm going to hit apply, and now our tempo will be halved. So as we kind of work with that. So now as we do that, other MIDI tracks may now play at half the speed, or other tracks may be affected. So if they are in musical mode, you probably want to take the other tracks and make sure that when we do this, that they are not in musical mode. So just come here and make sure that the tracks aren't in musical mode, so we could select the particular events for that. But also when we're dealing with other MIDI tracks, so let's say if we have an instrument or MIDI track here, we have this option here for these to be in linear mode or musical mode just by clicking on this little icon here. So when it's in musical mode, what it's going to do is then the MIDI tracks will shift to the new tempo, which may not be what you want to do. Excuse me. But what we could do is we want these to stay at their actual like time code value. So that's when we would take the existing MIDI tracks and put them into linear mode. Then as we change the tempo, they're going to play back at the same exact positions. But Michael, if you want to share with me your file, I know there may be a couple of other little things, but I'd be happy to kind of take a look at it and do some edits and send the project file back to you if you want it to. So, and you could just put it into like a WeTransfer or Dropbox or something like that. Okay, so we had a question, and I forgot to put this into the last live stream. Why does the metering color not always change after setting it in preferences? Okay, so let's say if we're looking at our meters in this particular project, we can come over here. Let's look at our master meter. All right, so here we look at this. We could have different metering scales, different types of meter scales here. So we have like CAT System 20, 1420, digital scale, EBU, British, Nordic. So as we look at these particular meters, when we go to the preferences and we go to meter display, metering appearance, that we can notice that we have, so if I wanted to change the meters for digital, I could come here and let's just add a new point, and I'll say, okay, right at that point, I want it to be red. So let's just come here. So anytime that when we have digital scales and we play, that when it gets to about minus 22.2 dB, it'll turn red. So as we come here, so let's play. But if I switch it to my DIN or CAT System 12, 20, that those aren't changing. So when we look at these particular meters, each of these meter types, we can have independent color schemes for each of the meters like we see here. So I'll now put it back to my defaults. So if you change it here, make sure that it is the meter that's actually being utilized within the meter, the master meter there. All right, and we had a question, and someone said that this didn't work for them, but remote control of the control room volume using the new MIDI remote system. So let's go ahead and set that up. So let's say we have, we'll go to the MIDI remote. Now let's say I'll go to my Choice OS controller here. All right, and I will just go ahead and just delete these particular mappings that I have set up. Okay, so I have my MIDI remote. So I want this fader here. I move this fader, my Choice OS controller, and I want that to control my control room volume. So I will move this fader. I'm going to double click. All right, move the fader so we know what object we want to assign a function. Then I'm going to right click and we'll say pick up for MIDI remote. I apply the mapping and now I'll close this window, and if everything, now when I move this fader, that's automatically controlling the remote, the control room volume like that. So that's all you have to do to set up the control room with the new MIDI remote. I think this is from Michael Pierce. Says, as you can see below, I just finished comping. Says question, rough tuning, audio warping, some vocals, 2 layers of main, 3 or 4 background vocals. I've cut all the gaps of nothing, applied fades to everything, and it's in a nice, fairly neat state. What I wanted to do at this point was to bounce each of these events. Obviously, I could select the whole track, bounce it, but then it would join all these events into a single event, but I'd rather keep them in this format so when I get back to work, the producer can choose what he or she wants, muted, doubled, harmonized, etc., etc. But I'd like to bounce down all my little tuning and alignments before that. Is there a quick way to do this quickly, automatically, or am I going to have to select each event manually and bounce them? All right, so let's say I'll just make a copy of this file here. And let's say I've done all sorts of lovely edits and we've done tuning, all sorts of, we will do some fades here. Okay, let's do a fade out here. I wanted to make this one loud. I wanted to mute just a little section here. Let's slip this event, and so we have all this. So, and I think he wanted to be able to keep, if it was my understanding, to keep like each of the little sections kind of independent, but to still have all of the edits kind of baked in. So, and if we do a bounce audio selection, so if I select all of these events and I do just a typical bounce selection, so we can replace that, and now it's all one event as opposed to the individual events. So if we wanted to maintain kind of the individual boundaries for each of these, what I would do is to select the track and go to edit to render in place. So let me just, or we could select, I'll just select the events here. So we'll go to our render settings and we want to switch it to mode to as separate events. So now as we do render in place, these edits are completely intact and every little fade in and fade out is now just been applied. And let me see if let me just check that one more time again here. Make sure it's just render in place this track here. I'll erase that. So we'll choose as separate events. It's my son's bus time now. Okay, let me just set that up one more time with the right function. So, and we could say mute the source tracks. Okay, and there we're going to have kind of each of the different sections kind of automatically applied. I think just try this one more time because I think if we do it as the render events, let me just try this one more time. course, I had it working right before I did the... So I think, Michael, if you play with it, that you set it to the separate events on the render in place, that it should maintain all of the different settings. Let me just make sure it's not. Try it one last time, but I had it working right before. I tested it right before we did this, so. I'll just try it on another project. Maybe it's something with this. Okay, here's kind of a good scenario. So I'll activate this project. So let's say we have all these edits done here. So we'll keep it as separate events. So as you can see now, it's going to render it with all of the separate events there. So it must have been something with the stem. So our new file. So all of the edits that you've done will now be maintained, and all of the individual sections will be just rendered just like that. So again, give that a try, select the events. I'm not sure why it didn't work in the first one, but you know, select the two events here if you want to keep there as separate events, and then you just render and keep as separate events, and you should be good. So it says also, sometimes when I double click an audio event and open it in the lower zone, the playhead is often invisible in the lower zone. So when aligning stuff, I'd place the playhead in the upper zone of the alignment panel and audio warp in the lower zone to align. So like when we go into the sample editor, one of the things that's changed, and might have changed in Cubase 12, is that you could have it show only the active clip. So check like these settings here for like what you want it to show. So you could, you know, you could say edit the active clip only, or show only the active clip. So if we check those two settings, and then I think that may help you with that, Michael. All right, so we have a question. I'm recording guitars and vocals away from my computer, so I'm controlling Cubase from a MIDI pedal board. I would like to make a trigger macro that would record, stop, undo, Control Z, so that if I make a bad take, I can just stop and undo that remotely and start over. But Cubase will not allow me to add undo to a macro, which means I would have to go over to my computer keyboard to press Control Z. Why is undo not allowed in a macro? And is there a workaround for what I'm trying to do? All right, so if you're going to do this, there is a special record mode in Cubase that's kind of set up specifically for this. And when we go to our record modes here on audio, or just in our generic record modes, so we'll just come right here. It's called re-record. Okay, so now let's say I'm recording. All right, so I'm going to, we'll just start right here and record. Okay, so I have this track armed. All right, so now let's say I had a false take. I hit the record button again, just one take, and it takes me right back to where I was. Now let's say I had a count in, So all you have to do is, let's say I'm going to activate a count in, and we'll say, okay, so now I hit record again. All right, so say I messed up, I hit record again, I get my count in. And it will take you directly back to the same spot. So I would switch it just to re-record mode. And then as soon as you hit the record button again, it will just kind of take you back, and you could take record and re-record and switch between those modes with another MIDI command. So that way the re-record, instead of having to rewind, go back to your start position, erase the take or undo the take, you just hit re-record, and it's just going to go right back there to kind of simplify that whole process. So if you give it that a try, I think that will make a lot of sense for your workflow. Okay, so I think we already answered that one. All right, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Is there a way to know the latency introduced by a VST instrument? The mixer channel latency only shows plugins latency. Thanks. So basically, you know, VST instruments, they already kind of know what the latency is. So the only the plugin itself is not generating any latency, because the VST instrument is actually playing back at sample accurate precision. So, you know, because when you load up the preset, it's going to take all that into account and kind of pre-buffer everything in itself. So VST instruments tend not to have latency. The latency is what the buffer is set to on the audio interface and what audio plugins can impose on the instruments. But the instruments themselves don't have latency, which is why you don't see them actually shown in the like when you go to the latency overview in the large mix console. Okay, so we have a question. I wanted to know if it's possible to adjust the length of an event to the closest full bar by shortcut key command. What I do is put a few samples on a track and create a loop. Then I glue them and have to manually drag the event to a full bar or so. Could there be a key command for this? So probably an easy way of doing this is we'll just do a new empty project. Okay, so let's say I'm doing a quick loop of some kind. All right, so if I have this and I want to make that into like a one measure audio file. So an easy way of doing this is, one, make sure that you have your snap turned on, and I'm just going to grab my range selection tool, and then I'm going to just select a range and it will snap to our grid. I have it set to beat, and go to audio to bounce selection and replace, and now we have one audio file that is the length, and that's in equal measure. So once again, we can just take this particular range, grab the range selection tool, audio to bounce selection, replace, and that will replace it and create one brand new audio file that is exactly one measure long, even though the samples didn't last that long. All right. All right, let me just see if I got through everything. All right, so let me jump back to our live questions. Thanks for all the great questions. And again, if you've learned something new, make sure that you hit the like button. Okay, just reading through comments here. See some nice comments on Austrian audio. So I have the OC818 mic. Like it a lot. All right, so we just see, hi everyone, is there a tap tempo in artist? So I think if we wanted to do a tap tempo, I think that this might be an artist. I don't know off the top of my head, but if you wanted to do it, let's say, if you go to the beat calculator and just come here, and if you just click on tap tempo and then just hit either your mouse button or a space bar, that will, so if you're like, oh, okay, I want this as a tempo, that will kind of tell you what the tempo is, and you could choose to insert that at the tempo track start or at the selection start. If you wanted to do this for a MIDI part, so let's say we add an instrument track. And let's say I just put this into record and I'm just tapping quarter notes. So I'm just hitting like the beat, tapping it out. So if I'm tapping along with music, you may hear my son tapping along upstairs above me. So we have MIDI notes that are recorded. So if you have MIDI, then we could come over to our functions, and then we see merge tempo from tapping. And then we say I tapped at quarter notes or whole notes, and we could begin at the bar start. And now when we go to add a tempo track, that we could see kind of what the tempo is. So there's several different ways of doing tempo, tap tempo. So let me know if those will work for you. Appreciate Jazz Dude just doing so well at moderation. All right, my son just walked into my office. I forgot to lock the door. Hang on just 1 second. All right, sorry. I check in on my son, see how his day was at school. All right.
Remember to remind me when we're going to go to the store, right?
I promised to take my son to the store to get him something after he got back from school. So. All right, I'm glad that John Costigan from Kenosha made it. All right, so we have a question. Why would adding new audio track, vocal, in an existing project not show controls to record, enable, monitor under track name? So let's say if we go to add audio track here. Okay, so it could be that maybe it's too small, like the height. So you may have to increase it vertically. And there's also, if you click here in the lower, you could switch between like simple presets or standard or recording. So, but you could check just to make sure that like the track height is big enough. And if that still isn't working, what you could do is just right click and go to track control settings. And then you could see that you may have different functions here for like an audio track that are hidden. And you could also put different things in like the first or second row as well here. So give those the thing, give that a try, Sable. All right, we see Gareth had to dash, so thanks for joining us on the live stream today. So we see from Dunstan, is it possible to create a global view that uses your main supervision preset on a second screen? I know you have to insert it somewhere, so I'm not sure where that would work. So to do that, like often what I do in projects is like as I'm playing a particular project here, I'll have the supervision just kind of located either on, you know, people will often put it on like the master fader of, and I'll just take off my loop. Let's go to the master fader here. And you could put it as an insert and see supervision. And I'll just load up just a quick. So that's one area to do it. Now, if you also, what I like to do is I put it in the control room, and then I'll just put it on, let's say in the main, and I'll just go to my supervision here. So if I wanted to see my supervision, then you could just drag it to any screen that you want, make it full screen. So either like in the master fader or in the control room, and then just drag it anywhere you want. So yeah, it's a beautiful plugin. I think it's sold a lot of, you know, third screens for people. All right, so we have Hafergut Music or Hafergut Music. Thanks for joining us. All right, take care, Gareth. Glad you can make the live stream. I have almost the bass line done for Prometheus, so I may have to just check on, see if I get some MIDI information, make sure I got the right chords. All right, just going through. More comments. Guess we're at 120 likes. Thank you very much. All right, so we have a question, Greg. How do you use a logical editor to delete MIDI notes from C2 to F3, for example? Thank you. All right, so let's take a look. Okay, so I'm just going to come here. Okay, so we have a bunch of MIDI notes here. All right, so we want to delete C2 through F3, so we'll go to MIDI, to our logical editor. And let's remove, so we say in the process, we want to choose delete, and we'll say type is equal to notes. And we'll set our condition here to value 1, which is the pitch, is inside range, let's say C2 through F3. Okay, and if I did everything right, well, so that's all you had to do with my added sound effect from my mouth. So let's undo that. So again, we want to delete notes that are inside the range, pitch, which is going to be value 1. Value 2 will be velocity in a MIDI note. Inside the range, C2 through F3, just like that. And we see Samson's stress test recording is still going well. All right, so we see question, is there a way to transfer a project from Cakewalk into Cubase 12? So generally it's going to be, MIDI information would be carried over as a standard MIDI file. Audio could be done, probably you could export an OMF or AAF between the two programs. It's not going to carry over like plugins that have been kind of embedded directly into the file, or generally a lot of automation and plugins, but you can get the media over. So what a lot of people would do is take time, make stem files, or basically like equal length audio files, and be able to import those into other programs very easily as well. So, but no like direct integration or open this file. It's always problematic. I think Logic tried to do it with us, and then it was just a big mess for them. So, okay, so I just see which app is that. So I think everything we're doing is in Cubase, but it'll just maybe it's a question from Gamehead. So. Okay, so I see just a question. I don't need Nuendo now, but I'm considering moving from Studio One to Cubase as my main linear DAW because of the spatial audio support. If I move into audio for video, would there be upgrade pricing? So yeah, and there's generally like different promotions that are going on. And currently we are running a cross-grade promotion, so you could check that out as well. So if you're wanting to cross-grade from Studio One, which we've had a lot of people do, directly to Cubase, you can do that quite easily. Okay, so we see, does the new ASIO thing in Cubase 12 work for Bluetooth headphones? So there really wasn't any changes to ASIO. So there's Bluetooth MIDI support that was added in version 12, but so you could do Bluetooth headphones. Generally, the latency is really high. So it's convenient, I know, to have like wireless headphones, but generally I think Bluetooth is adding 43 milliseconds of latency. So if you're trying to mix on it or track on it, in addition to latency of your audio interface that you're using. It can be problematic. So I would always suggest doing like wired headphones and just get a longer cable, get an extension cable if you wanted to be free. But I think that the added expense of the latency far outweighs the convenience of being wireless, and so I would always recommend getting a wired headphones. Okay, so we see last question for me from Dunstan. You could ask as many questions as you want. If audio is playing on a track but nothing is on it, what's going on with that? Okay. All right. So, all right. So we'll just reread this. Okay. If audio is playing on a track but nothing is on it, what's going on with that? So, I mean, generally, if it's, could be maybe a virtual instrument, it could be an effect that's maybe being generated. But generally, I mean, if there's no event, there shouldn't be any playback. But check just to make sure like nothing is being routed to it. Check your routings here. And if you solo the track and you still hear audio, it seems strange. So like it shouldn't do that. But I've seen sometimes where maybe, it's a group track and effects are being sent to the group, or something is being bused to the group or the VCA, and you may see the actual tracks, the metering go. So, but if you have a picture or a screenshot or a little video, I'd be happy to take a look at it, and you can send it to me at Club Cubase at steinberg.de. Okay, so we see, could I create a macro to add an event to the arrangers section based on the length of the selected range with a single key? So I don't think so, but let's see if there's maybe some workaround. So let's see if we have like a global. So you could, if you have like a part selected, so let's say if I come here, it's not a single key, but it's not hateful. So let's say, and there's a preference, so if you come here and hit the letter P, you could then double click. So if you just come, hit the letter P, you could double click between the left and right locators on particular events. So if we just come here and double click on the arranger track, that will create, so it's not, it's a simplified way of doing it. It'll kind of use the left and right locators. I don't think that there's a way to populate it with a key command. Let me just check to see if there's anything. Yeah, so I don't think that there's a way with a key command, but you could just double click based on the left and right locators. And there's ways where you could just, set a range here, and that will automatically set the left and right locators via preferences. And then you could just double click just like that. So it's not hateful, but it's not like a single key or macro-able. Okay, so we see question, why would you need two MIDI keyboards and how would you use them? So I, like in my setup, I have just a small controller on my desk that's immediately in front of me. And to my left, I have an old Roland 880, which has, you know, like really accurate piano key feel. So it's a kind of a known feel the action on the keyboard, and you may have just a 2-octave controller that people use for switching articulations on different sample libraries that don't take away from, you know, notes that are being played on controllers. But a lot of times it's ergonomics as well, and sometimes people will use multiple controllers for different things. I know people that have an 88 key MIDI controller where each key is set up to do a different function through generic remote. So you could use it just like that as well. Okay, so you just see, hey, when I record MIDI keyboard panorama P6, there are 5 layers of MIDI notes stacked on top of each other. It's a nightmare to edit. So if you wanted to take care of that, one of the things that you could do is use the input transformer. So it's like you could use a preset that doesn't stack 5 layers on top. But if we go to a MIDI track, the older versions in 11 and earlier, you saw this little icon here. That was the input transformer. But now we could just come to the input transformer here, and we can say, okay, I want this for the track project. So now when I come here, we could open up the panel, and there will be presets so that you could just say, and there will be factory presets for channel filtering. So you can say, I only want to record on channel 1. And now as we do this, it will filter out everything except MIDI channel 1 or MIDI channel 2. But, you know, ideally Cubase is capturing exactly what your MIDI controller is transmitting. So, but if you need to filter out, so, you know, try to change it in your controller. That's probably the best thing. So you're not recording 5 notes every single note that you hit. There you see how we're doing. We got a couple more minutes. All right, so we see, apologies, this has been asked before, but is there a way to open lanes on multiple tracks at the same time? Let's take a look. Okay, so let's come here. So I have this, and let's see if we could show lanes. Okay, so one thing I think if we do, let's come here. I'm just going to hide my. All right, so let's say I have these. If I have these into a folder, so let's move these to a new folder, and then let's do group editing on the folder. Let's see if there's a keyboard shortcut, maybe for show lanes. Let's see if I have these both selected, and So if you use a keyboard shortcut, you can open up lanes on multiple tracks simultaneously. Or do it from the generic remote. All right, got about 1 more minute. Let's see if we get one more question in. All right, so just see a quick question, would Nuendo Live be better? So Nuendo Live is really just primarily just a capturing program, so you can't really do editing or run it through plugins. So it's often used for live sound concerts, and that's kind of the intention of the actual Nuendo Live. All right, so with that, we're just about out of time. So I want to thank everyone for all the great questions, and we will see everyone on Friday starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Everyone, please stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you on Friday. Take care.